This is Musings of the Shibe podcast. I'm your host, Roja Shibe.
Roja Shibe here with another episode of Musings of the Shibe podcast. In our ongoing discussion of the Bitcoin size block size debate, this week we are discussing Segwit and its many different aspects. In particular, what is Segwit, who the BIPs are involved, the New York Agreement, as well as the user-activated software. So in this episode 142, we are going to discuss what is segregated witness. So we're going to break it down before we get into Segwit 2x and the user-activated software. But before we get into that, so this is from CryptoNext.com. Abigail Johnson, the CEO of Fidelity Investment, is in love with cryptocurrency. Ms. Johnson revealed on May 23rd at the New York conference that Fidelity has plans to integrate Coinbase portfolio tracking into the investment platform in Q3 2017. The CEO has revealed that her company has tested various aspects of cryptocurrency, stating, "We built proofs of concept that accept Bitcoin's microtransactions. We set up a small Bitcoin and Ethereum mining operation just done in the spirit of learning." Coinbase was approved to trade Litecoin and Ethereum in March by the New York Department of Financial Services, meaning that we'll almost certainly see Bitcoin, Litecoin, and Ethereum portfolio tracking at Fidelity Investments soon, and thus more mainstream attention for cryptocurrencies. There's a huge use for investors and marks one, if not first integration of crypto and real fiat investment. This is a big deal. I know someone that has Fidelity financial instrument platform, so I'll be doing a personal update on that and seeing what does it take to activate that? Is it for all their plans? Do you have to ask for it? Is it coming automatically? How much can you invest, from your check? Is it, wrapped in 401ks, ROIs, the whole smorgasbord, if you will. And then here's a very interesting article from Political Magazine. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm going to read some of it. It's by Deborah Bruno. And it's Brooklyn's latest craze, making your own electric grid. Using the same technology that makes Bitcoin possible, neighbors are buying and selling renewable energy to each other. So, Michael Grua at Blunt Talk Brooklyn, a real estate broker, installed 24 solar panels on his Park Slope rooftop in 2012 during a home renovation. All he knew was that he liked the idea of being able to supply his own green electricity and run his air conditioning in the summer without paying exorbitant charges. So he got as many panels as his utility in the state would allow. "I'm the guy who wanted solar panels on the roof since Jimmy Carter was president," said the 54-year-old. Then one day in 2016, he got a knock on his door. Sasha Santiago had been on a nearby rooftop and spied Guerrero's solar panel. He used Google Earth to home in on the right building. A strange man rang my bell and said, "I'm not kidding." He said, "Hi, I'm Sasha. Can I talk to you about microgrid?" And I said, "What's that?" And Santiago explained that the company he worked for, Brooklyn-based LO3 Energy, was planning a pilot program that would permit renewable energy users like Guerrero to sell power directly to their neighbors. In effect, the neighbors would buy their own small power grid in the middle of the most populous city in the country. And then it kind of goes on from there. It's very fascinating how the intersection of technology, blockchain technology, various different movements like, green energy movement, solar energy is being utilized and transforming many different aspects of different sectors, different parts of the world, particularly cities which are, a lot of the population is gravitating back into the city and is heavily dense, and there's not much ability to, move, navigate, or change. And here you have changes occurring in one of the most populous cities in the world, which is New York. Great, fascinating article. Highly recommend you. And then blockchain in Berkeley. So, blockchain. Blockchain is a data structure that makes it possible to create digital ledger transactions and share it among a distributed network of computers. It uses cryptography to allow each participant on the network to manipulate the ledger in a secure way with the need of central authority. So this is Berkeley has an educational program with workshops, resources, a white paper circle, decal, webcast readings and homework. I have a link in the show notes. And basically is one of many universities, Princeton, MIT, Stanford, and a few others that are having these, have incorporated full-on legitimate educational programs, seminars, incorporated into their university system where you can go to class and learn about blockchain technology, which is important because it's necessary to not only educate the populace about this, but bring on the next set of developers, if you will. Encryptors will encrypt messages on the blockchain for private communication. This is from Bitcoin News, written by Antonio Madero. Cryptos is building a blockchain based on all-in-one network for secure social and business communication. An ICO is currently ongoing, improving on privacy with blockchain technology. In today's Orwellian society, privacy becomes a rare and valuable asset that some go to great lengths to protect, while others simply throw it away in exchange for convenience. As technology evolves, however, so does access to privacy-oriented tools and their underlying technology. Blockchain tech has gone a long way in the realm of financial privacy, and now Cryptverser wants to build upon it and extend its use onto end-to-end encryption by providing a blockchain-based all-in-one network for secure social and business communication. The project is currently undergoing a crowdfunding campaign that will help fund the development of this network. A unified, secure, instant communication, Cryptverse provides real end-to-end communication and unique blockchain-based authentication. The latter, which allows users to truly identify and confirm each other's identity through the use of private and public keys. The end result is a secure and private messenger, which also features its SVCK system, allowing users to send funds to each other anonymously. In order to fund the development and marketing of Crypto's network, a crowdfunding campaign is currently taking place. The form of an initial coin offering. The Crypto's funding stage will last until June 30th of 2017, during which time investors can buy CV coin, the underlying token in the Crypto's platform. The CV coin is required in order to interact with the Crypto's platform and to cover its transaction fees. Transactions are required to authorize and identify users' access to the public encryption keys, ensuring the messages cannot be forged nor can they be decrypted. So far, Crypto's ICO has managed to gather over $900,000. These funds will be used to cover mobile, back-end, and infrastructure costs, as well as licensing fees, legal services, operational costs, and, of course, marketing. The initial coin offering is currently ongoing and will last, again, users can invest in Crypto's ICO using Bitcoin, Ethereum, and even USD. Most recent support for the time token was also added. 15 million CV coins will be distributed, along with the special benefits such as free subscription, access to special features, and free access to CVPA systems and more. We'll eventually get into the whole ICO thing and see what exactly people are offering. There's a big, huge craze right now. It's swamping the Ethereum network. There's some obvious scams, not so obvious scams, but it's interesting to see, what people are trying to tokenize and trying to raise capital for basically their businesses and investments, if you will. They will have, according to the website, a final report available on July 5th, which is tomorrow, which will probably inform you that Crypto's ICO has been successfully finished and what the whole outcome is, if you will. So that is it for the news. On to the matter at hand. We're on to actually finally define what Segwit is. So what is Segwit? It's one of the proposed solutions to address block size issues or congestion on the network, to allow for more transactions to occur on the blockchain, while still keeping Bitcoin. The proposals are soft forks, so they're not hard forks like Bitcoin XT, Classic, and Bitcoin Unlimited, which seeks to raise the block size from 1 megabyte to 2 megabytes to potentially 4 megabytes to a dynamic block size, to where the miners choose whether or not it's something greater than 1 megabyte, for a period of time, maybe even higher the next period, and then downgrade, but never being below 1 megabyte. But Segwit in itself doesn't actually, physically change the 1 megabyte. What it does is it changes how the transactions are put in the blockchain. It reorientates them so that you're able to allow more information in that 1 megabyte, more transactions to occur. So let's get into that discussion. It's a very distinctive difference between Bitcoin XT, Classic, and Bitcoin Unlimited. And in this discussion, since we're targeting Segwit 2X, where eventually, as part of the agreement, there'll be a raise into the 2 megabyte size. Initially, that's not what's really going to happen at first. That's a separate thing. That's actually a hard fork. So here we go. So this comes from our Bitcoin. It was asked 7 months ago. And what is Segwit? So we have CoinSpirit. It's a major upgrade to Bitcoin that many individuals finally do with scaling. and we're going to talk about the Bitcoin Segwits. Then it has a link in the show notes. This is one of the reasons why I have it here, because that's really strong linkages here. One of the first Segwit presentations of Peter Will. He's one of the developers of Segwit. There's a YouTube here in the link for your further review, and I also have it separated out in the show notes. I highly encourage you watching it so you have an idea of not only who the developer is, put a name to the face, but also hear his explanation of Segwit. And there's also a post which you will read about the Segwit's benefits and costs. But here's an explanation. It's actually from Luke Jr. himself. He actually commented on this post. So basically, a simple exclusion of signature data from transaction IDs, which causes most unwanted malleability issues and makes checking signatures more efficient, linear scaling, and CPU time. Additionally, it affords the opportunity to trivially take a number of changes at the same time that otherwise would be difficult. So 1, input values are now covered under signatures, greatly reducing the amount of data required by hardware wallets and other detached signers. 2, scripts now have versions so that you can more easily upgrade in the future. 3, it's lifting the 1 megabyte size limit to 4 megabytes while adding a new block weight limit to avoid the most harmful effects of a block size increase, which effectively caps out the effective block size at around 2 megabytes. The downside is mainly entirely due to the block size limit increase. Right now, the network is suffering severe centralization problems due to the block being 1 megabyte, and it's likely this could get worse if blocks grow. Increasing the limit is only safe if we trust miners to limit themselves to 1 megabyte until the situation changes. Once the actual block being mined are larger than 1 megabyte, then the resource requirements to use Bitcoin grows with it. And then Michael014 says the article by Andrews Annapolis was more understandable to me. So we're going to read that article. So this was published August 8th of 2016. It's about Segwit, and it's by Andrews Annapolis. Segregated witness in aligning economic incentives with resource costs. Bitcoin mining nodes and full nodes incur costs for resources used to support the Bitcoin network and blockchain. As the scale of Bitcoin increases, so does the cost of resources. CPU, network bandwidth, disk space, and memory. Miners are compensated for the cost through fees that are proportional to the size and bytes of each transaction. Non-mining full nodes are not confiscated, so they incur these costs because they have a need to run an authoritative, full validated, full index node, perhaps because they use the node to operate a Bitcoin business. Without transaction fees, the growth in the Bitcoin data would arguably increase dramatically. Fees are intended to align the needs of the Bitcoin users with the burden their transactions impose on the network through a market-based discovery mechanism. The calculation of fees based on the transaction size treats all data in the transaction as equal in cost. But from the perspective of full nodes and miners, some parts of the transaction carry much higher costs. Every transaction added to the Bitcoin network affects the consumption of our 4 resources on nodes. Disk space. Each transaction is stored in the blockchain, adding to the total size of the blockchain. The blockchains is stored on disk, but the storage can be optimized by pruning older transactions. So maybe you don't want to keep transactions all the way back to the very beginning, 2009. Maybe you want to go have a node that runs from 2013 on. CPU. Every transaction must be validated, which requires CPU time. Bandwidth. Every transaction is transmitted through flood propagation across the network at least once. Without optimization, transactions are transmitted again as part of the block, doubling the impact on the network capacity. So you're pretty much broadcasting the information twice. Memory nodes. Memory. Nodes that validate transactions keep the UTXO set, the list of all unspent transaction outputs in memory. Because memory is at least 1 order of magnitude more expensive than disk, the growth of the UTXO set contributes disproportionately to the cost of running a node. So you're eating a lot of pretty much the hardware space and the usage of a computer dice because of this. As you can see from the list above, not every part of the transaction has an equal impact on the cost of running the node or the ability of Bitcoin to scale to support transactions. The most expensive part of the transactions are the newly created outputs as they add to the in-memory UTXO setting. By comparison, signatures, aka witness data, add the least burden to the network and the cost of running a node, because witness data are only validated once and are never used again. Furthermore, immediately after receiving a new transaction validating witness data, nodes can disregard the witness data. If fees are calculated on the transaction side without discriminating between the 2 types of data, This does not align the market incentive fees with the equal cost imposed by transaction. In fact, the current fee structure actually encourages the opposite behavior because witness data is the largest part of the transaction. So it's more important to validate and acknowledge the witness data than any other aspect of what's going on. The incentive created by fee markers because they affect the behavior of wallets. All wallets must implement some strategy for assembling transactions that takes into consideration a number of factors such as privacy, reducing address reuse, fragmentation, making lots of loose change and fees. The fees are overwhelmingly motivating wallets to use as few inputs as possible in transaction. This can lead to a UTXO picking and changing address strategies and inadvertently bloat the UTX set. Transactions consume the UTX in their inputs to create new UTX with their outputs. A transaction therefore has more inputs than outputs, while it results in an increase in the UTX set, whereas transactions that has more outputs than inputs will result in an increase in the UTX sets. Let's consider the difference between inputs and outputs and call them the net new UTX. This is an important metric as it tells us that the impact a transaction will have on the most expensive network-wide resource, that the in-memory UTX set. A transaction with positive net new UTX adds set to the burden. A transaction with a negative new net UTX reduces the burden. We would therefore want to encourage transactions that are negative new net UTX or neutral zero new net UTX. Let's look at an example when incentives are created by the transaction fee calculation with or without segregated witness. We will look at two different transactions. Transaction A is 3 input, 2 output transaction, which has a net new UTX metric of 1, meaning it consumes 1 more UTX than it creates, reducing the UTX set by 1. Transaction B is a 2 input, 3 output transaction, which has a net new UTX metric of 1, meaning it adds 1 UTX to the UTX set, imposing additional cost on the entire Bitcoin network. Both transactions use multi-signatures or 2 out of 3 scripts to demonstrate how complex scripts increase the impact of segregated witness on fees. Let's assume that a transaction fee of 30 Satoshi per byte and a 75% fee discount on witness data. So without segregated witness, the transaction fee of 25,710 Satoshis and transaction B is 18,999 Satoshis. With segregated witness, the transaction fee is 8,130 Satoshis and transaction B is 12,445 Satoshis. Both transactions are less expensive when segregated witness is implemented. By comparing the cost between the two transactions, we see that before segregated witness, the fee is higher for the transaction that has a negative net new UTX. After segregated witness, the transaction fees align with the incentive to minimize new UTX creation by not inadvertently penalizing transactions with many inputs. So segregated witness before the two main effects on the fees that are paid by the Bitcoin users. Firstly, segregated witness reduces the overall cost of transactions by discounting witness data and increasing the capacity of the Bitcoin blockchain. Secondly, segregated witness discounts on the witness data corrects a misalignment of incentives that may have inadvertently created bloat in the UTX set. So basically what it's doing is it's making it so that when the information is propagated across the network, it is done in the most minimalistic manner where it's not utilizing all these different resources. It's done once, you're not getting multiple broadcasts or outputs. And because of that, because all these resources are not being utilized, the fee is going to be lower because you're not using all this computer and bandwidth to connect the process. So here's another way of looking at segregated witness. This comes from Investigapedia, definition of Segwit or segregated witness. Segwit is a process in which the block size limit on the blockchain increases by removing signature data from the Bitcoin transactions. When certain parts of the transactions are removed, this frees up space and capacity to add more transactions to the chain. Segregate means to separate, and witnesses are the transaction signatures. Hence, segregated witness in short means the separate transaction signatures. The concept of segregated wit was formulated by Dr. Peter Will. Breaking down Segwit or segregated witness. The Bitcoin blockchain consists of multiple systems distributed across the peer-to-peer network. These systems are called nodes and serve as administrators of the Bitcoin transactions. All transactions made in the Bitcoin are duplicated across these nodes, making it virtually impossible to hack and corrupt the transaction. The transaction data is shared across the multiple nodes consists of two components, inputs and outputs. There could be one and multiple inputs and outputs involved in a transaction. The output is the public address of the receipt. The input is the public address of the sender. The sender sends the recipient's public address in order to send funds to him or her, and the majority of the space in the transaction consists of a signature, a part of the input which verifies that the sender has the required funds to make to make a payment. So in fact, Bitcoin moves from inputs to outputs for each transaction transmitted. Once each of the nodes have verified the transaction is valid, the transaction is included in a block which is added to the chain on the general ledger for public access. The problem that Bitcoin platform is facing is that as more and more transactions are being conducted, more blocks have to be added to the chain, and blocks are generated every 10 minutes that are constrained to the maximum size of 1 megabyte. Due to this constraint, only a certain number of transactions can be added to the block. The weight of the transactions represented by the block is weighing down the network and causing delays in the process and verifying transactions in some cases, taking hours to confirm a transaction is valid. Imagine all Bitcoin transactions have been carried out since the inception of Bitcoin in 2009. Sitting on the blockchain is still piling up. Long term, the system would not be sustainable if the radical change is not made. Peter Will suggested to solve this problem, the digital signatures need to be segregated from the transaction data. The process is known as segregated witness, or Segwit. Digital signatures accounts for 65% of the space in a given transaction. Segwit attempts to ignore the data attached to a signature by stripping off the signature from within the input and moving it to the structure towards the end of the transaction. This would increase the 1 megabyte limit for the block size to a little under 4 megabytes. In addition to slightly increasing the capacity size of the blocks, Segwit also solves a problem where a receiver can intercept and modify the sender transaction ID in a bid to get more coins from the sender. Since the digital signature would be detached from the input, unscrupulous parties would have no way of changing the transaction ID without also nullifying the digital signature. As of May 2017, Segwit is yet to put in effect. 95% of the Bitcoin community have to agree to this new process and switch to the new Bitcoin Core client for at least 2 weeks before Segwit can be successfully activated. So far, only estimated 30% have signed up for it. And then I'm going to give another 2 more explanations, and then I'm going to kind of give you my idea. Aaron Van Woodern, Segregated Witness Part 1, How a Clever Hack Could Significantly Increase Bitcoin's Potential. So this was published December 19, 2015. If one proposal excited attendees at the recent Scaling Bitcoin workshop in Hong Kong, this is where the Hong Kong proposal came out of. Bitcoin Core blockchain is developed by Dr. Peter Will, Segregated Witness. Praised by many within the technical community, Segregated Witness is expected to improve Bitcoin's performance in a number of ways. Well, some even hope it might be the scaling solution that helps bring some peace back into the Bitcoin community. What are Bitcoin transactions again? In order to send a Segregated Witness, it's helpful to understand what Bitcoin transactions are on a more technical level. For starters, it's important to realize the Bitcoin protocol at its core consists of transactions. Nodes on the peer-to-peer network don't send each other Bitcoin, they send each other packages that contain transaction data. These Bitcoin transactions, in a way, are really sets of blocks. More specifically, each transaction contains 2 main components. One half effectively unlocks Bitcoin that were locked up in the previous transaction using pieces of data called inputs. Inputs include scripts and instructions on how to unlock the input called script checks. The other half consists of one of the new several locks called outputs, which lock the same amount or less Bitcoin up again. Outputs include scripts called script hub keys. As such, Bitcoin effectively moves from inputs to outputs with a single transaction and jumps from transaction to transaction at the same time. There is one main exception to the rule. A coin-based transaction, not to be confused by the wallet company and exchange with the same name, is a transaction created by a miner when he finds a new block and contains the block word. At the time of the reading of the article, it was 25 Bitcoins. We're at 12.5 right now. Additionally, a miner can increase the Coinbase reward by any amount of Bitcoin that was unlocked in transaction, but not lock it up again. The difference between the inputs and the outputs, these are transaction fees. All of this unlocking and locking up of Bitcoin is done by senders of transactions and sequentially transmitted over the Bitcoin network as packages of information. All nodes in the network then check whether this process of unlocking and locking up was done correctly. If everything checks out, they forward the transaction to other nodes, and if the node is also a miner, they might include the transaction in a block. Whether he actually does so is up to the miner. However, that's why it makes sense to include a fee. It is vital importance that the rules used by all nodes to verify transactions are compatible with the rules used by almost all miners. If some miners would include transactions of blocks that other nodes reject, the whole block would be considered invalid by that node. If that node is also a miner, this can lead to double spinning and network forks. These consensus rules, these rules on nodes agreed on, allow transactions to lock up and unlock Bitcoin in several different ways at once. But outputs to lock up Bitcoin typically at least include the script public key along the lines of prove that you own or know the private key that corresponds to the public key that corresponds to this Bitcoin address. It's easy to reproduce a public key from a private key, but it's basically impossible to reproduce a private key from a public key. Similar, it's easy to reproduce a Bitcoin address from a public key, but it's impossible to reproduce a public key from a Bitcoin address. As such, it's also easy to reproduce a Bitcoin address from a private key, but it's impossible to reproduce a private key from a Bitcoin address. It's a one-way street. The Bitcoin address used to lock Bitcoin up in the script public key, of course, is the address provided by the receiving end of the transaction. Since the receiver created that address using a private key, only he knows. He is the only one who can create a valid script sig, and therefore the only one who can create the new transaction and spin and lock up Bitcoin. So where do signatures come in? To prove ownership of the private key that corresponds to the public key that corresponds to the Bitcoin address, one could theoretically include the private key in the signature sig of this transaction, but of course that's not safe at all. Most importantly, anyone who sees the transaction could take the private key and create a new transaction or change the original transaction to attribute to himself as many Bitcoins are locked up before the original transaction is included in the block. If a miner did this, it would become a piece of cake to steal Bitcoin, since he's the one picking which transactions to confirm. Instead, therefore, the script pub key typically requires a script sig to include one or more signatures in order to unlock Bitcoin. Signatures are a cryptographic trick which uses private key in combination with other data to calculate a unique string of numbers. And using the magic of cryptography, the corresponding public key can be used to verify that the signatures were created using the private key. As such, signatures prove both ownership of private key as well as approval of a specific piece of data by the owner of that private key, and all which actually need to reveal the private key. In Bitcoin case, private keys are typically used to sign the transaction data minus the inputs. Hence, the script pub keys, the locked amounts, and some additional details. Subsequently, the signature and the public key from which the Bitcoin are spent are added to the input field of the transaction. This proves that the owner of the private key really intended to create the transaction and make sure it cannot be tampered with. Then all this transaction data, including the inputs this time, is hashed together, which creates the transaction ID, identifying the specific transaction. The transaction is especially included in the block. The miner hashes the transaction ID together with another transaction ID to produce a new hash. And this hash is hashed again, and this time along with a hash from two other transaction IDs. This process continues until there are only one hash left, and the structure of hashes is called a Merkle tree, and the remaining hash the Merkle root. This Merkle root is combined with additional block data to form the block header, which is used to identify the specific block. A hash of this block header finally must be included in the next block header, chaining blocks together. Bitcoin is considered immutable because changing any part of any transaction retroactively will alter the transaction ID, in turn altering the block header. But this altered block header would no longer meet the proof of work requirement, and since the block header influences the makeup of a bunch of block headers, neither were any of those. So what is a segregated witness? The segregated witness proposal, as presented by Wu in the Hong Kong, is based on the concept used in blockchain sidechain elements and complementing idea by the Bitcoin core developer Luke Dash Jr. It was conceptualized over the past couple months in cooperation with the Bitcoin core developers Gregory Maxwell and Eric Lombrazzo, and might be rolled out over the next year, which hasn't happened. We're in that process now. As such, from the perspective of Bitcoin nodes that don't use segregated witness, let's call them old nodes, some newly created outputs might soon use a strange type of script pub keys. Strange because these script pub keys can hardly be considered locked at all, commonly referred to as anyone can spin. And we'll get into the negatives of this when we talk about the downsides of all these different proposals. These script pub keys basically claim they don't require a signature, and additionally they will include some meaningless text. All nodes will consider these transactions crazy. They will think that anyone can create a new script set, and unlocking these outputs, meaning they're highly insecure. But at the same time, old nodes won't mind neither. After all, it's not that their Bitcoin is being messed around with, and other people are free to do with their Bitcoin as they please. This meaningless text would be considered weird but fine too, so they'll confirm the transaction is valid and forward it to other nodes. However, segregated witness enabled nodes, let's call them new nodes, will notice something else. They will see the otherwise meaningless text in the script pub key, but not consider it meaningless at all. Instead, new nodes will recognize this piece of text as another very special type of output. Much like typical outputs, this new type of output will require one or several signatures to unlock the Bitcoin. But unlike typical outputs, the new type of output will not require the signature to be included in the script seg of the subsequent transaction. Instead, it will require the signature to be included in the completely new part of the transaction, the segregated witness. And the segregated witness is basically an add-on that carries the signatures and some additional data. Importantly, the segregated witnesses are completely ignored by the old nodes, but recognized by the new nodes. Moreover, the data they will carry is not hashed along with the other parts of the transaction in the transaction ID. As such, both old nodes and new nodes will consider transactions containing the signatures in the segregated witness valid. Old nodes validate them because from their perspective, these transactions don't require a signature at all and they don't see one. And new nodes validate them because they require signature as a segregated witness. It says both old and new nodes hash the transaction ID and it's the same transaction ID. Everyone agrees on the makeup of the blocks and as such on the structure of the entire blockchain. Note that it's important that all miners or a very large majority should use segregated witness in order to prevent double spendings and chain forks, and none of them should. If all miners do use segregated witness, old nodes on the network might wonder why some transactions are included in the blocks, but since it's always up to the miners to decide which transactions to include, and since these are not transactions, they won't mine either. But there's one problem. If signatures have no effect on the makeup of the blockchain, then the blockchain no longer serves as a proof the correct signatures are included in the transaction. To make sure the signatures are embedded in the blockchain regardless, a segregated witness enabled miner adds a trick to it. Rather than creating only a Merkle tree out of all the transaction, it also creates a Merkle tree out of all the segregated witness to mirror the transaction tree. The segregated witness Merkle root then included in the input field of this Coinbase transaction. As such, segregated witness Merkle root changes the transaction data on the Coinbase transaction into a transaction ID and therefore influence the block header and ultimately make up the blockchain. Will segregated witness proposal allow signatures to be removed from the Bitcoin transaction while maintaining Bitcoin's immutability and without breaking any of the consensus rules? So this is a very complicated way of moving a little piece of the data out of the transaction of putting things on the blockchain or configuring the blockchain so that there is more room on the blockchain network and more room in the block in it itself, so you can have more transactions and more transaction fees. This might break down what segregated witness is. So imagine you have a shelf, and the shelf is 6 by 4, and it's 2 feet. On this shelf, you keep your movie collection, and since you've been around forever, you have some VHSs, you have old style DVDs, you have special edition DVDs, you have TV shows that are DVDs. So there are different size of packages. You have the VHS size, which is not as big of a collection as you once had, but you also have DVD cases. You have movie style DVD cases that are like the special edition of Lord of the Rings. Then you have movie style cases where you have it a nice little cardboard box that has like all 7 of the Fast and the Furious or Marvel movies or something like that. And then you have television shows that are a nice big Lord of the Rings style box where it's like an entire season. Then you have Blu-ray DVDs, which are much smaller boxes. You both have TV shows and movies in Blu-ray. And all this is compacted into 4 shelves. Everything is full. You have the things like stacked on top of each other. It's as full as can be, and there's no more room. There's so much no more room that you've put on top of the shelf, in the very top, all your TV shows are on top, and it's in a row of 2. Nothing stacked on top, just a row of 2, and that's it. That's all you have. You can't get a new shelf. You can't get rid of them. This is your prize movie collection. But you want everything to fit, and you're trying to figure out a way to have your movie collection on that shelf in that space without getting a new shelf or somehow extending the shelf by maybe knocking down one of the walls and extending it either left or right or higher. That's not something that you can do at this time. You're not maybe skilled to do so. So you take everything out, the entire collection, both on top of the shelf, and think of the top of the shelf as where, the meme pool is. And the shelf itself is the 1 megabyte, if you will. And so you take everything out and you have these 4 shelves that you've had everything stacked on. And you decide to reorientate the shelves. So you decide that you're going to have at the very top, because the Blu-ray DVDs, these small DVDs, don't require the same gap, because everything was all kind of even. They don't require the same gap. So basically what you can do is you can put it on a shorter height, and you can cram all the blue DVDs, because they're the same size, same length, they're smaller, onto a smaller size shelf. And then you can reorientate the rest of the 3 shelves into the size that's going to fit all the TV shows and VHSs and special edition movies on one shelf, so they can stack all together, because they're pretty much the same size and almost the same length. And then you can have the rest of your DVD collection on the other 2 shelves at different sizes and lengths, different, width, if you will, the height measurement. And now you have just reorientated the same shelves, the same mechanism here. You have the same 4 pieces, you reorientate everything, but now you no longer have the TV shows on top. You have everything all crammed into the same space, and you now have a little bit more room, so you can add more primarily Blu-ray DVDs onto your system, because into your little system here, because that's the new thing now. That's where everyone's going, and they're much smaller transactions, if you will. And so that's pretty much how I view segregated witness. It's just reorienting the block size to where you're able to conduct a business, whether it be the blockchain business, whether it be big, huge transactions of moving $10,000 to small, little, tiny micro transactions of 10 cents, 5 cents, $1, $5, buy your coffee, and you're able to do this in the same space without hard forking. Everything's on a soft fork, and so you don't have to upgrade old nodes, just like you did upgrade your shelf space here. You didn't create or add on or paint or color or do anything different. It was the same space, so you didn't have to really change anything. Or if you decided to, maybe you wanted to add some color to you and paint your little shelf space there, but it's unnecessary. You don't have to upgrade, not even wallets really, to order to participate in the new segregated witness. Everything is compatible, if you will. The thing that gets a little tricky with segregated witness is because you're removing that little signature data, if you will. You're removing it from the mechanism that creates the block size and the transaction IDs, and you're moving it kind of out, and you're changing it and putting it to the end and compressing things. You're causing what is called anyone can spend type of a concept, and that's, some see that as a vulnerability, that you're changing the very security nature of the blockchain, because everything needs to be validated by having that signature where you're locking everything up and having this 2 transaction broadcast, if you will, that's necessary to keep the network secure. And you're changing that aspect, because maybe perhaps a malicious miner will take that Segwit data, or even somehow someone could figure out how a node can take that Segwit data. That hasn't happened yet. Litecoin has been activated with Segwit for, I think, 7 weeks now. But that's one of the downsides, and we'll talk about that when we talk about the downsides of Segwit in general. But that's basically what Segregated is. And because you're able to change the orientation of these transactions, you're able to have more room. It all of a sudden 1 megabyte becomes 4 megabytes, which really, with all the mechanisms to make up the block size data, the blocks, all the transaction history and stuff like that, and the segregated witness, it becomes 2 megabytes. So it's basically tricking the network to thinking it's bigger than what it really is, those megabyte sizes. And this will allow for lower transaction fees, allow for less congestion on the blockchain. Everything is reorientated, and you're not having so much redundancy, I guess you can say, with the broadcasting twice, and you're not having this expenditure of CPU that is unnecessary and is more focused. And this is what segregated witness will do. So this comes from Bitcoin Core, and it's their stance. They're the ones who developed BIP 141 and BIP 148. So segregated witness in itself, and what they're stating to the community, what segregated witness benefit is. And so I'm going to read this. And then it talks about malleability. And before we get into segregated witness 2x and user activated software, we're going to define what malleability is, because it's one of the things that has been brought up in the discussion, but it's a little complicated, so that's why I separated it out from other terms I had to define before getting into segregated witness and some of the other different proposals. So segregated witness benefits. The segregated witness software, or Segwit, includes a wide range of features, many of which are highly technical. This page summarizes some of the benefits of those features. So malleability fix. Bitcoin transactions are identified by a 64-digit hexadecimal hash called a transaction identifier, or TEX ID, which is based on both the coins being spent and who will be able to resend the results of the transaction. Unfortunately, the way the TEX ID is calculated allows anyone to make small modifications to transactions that will change its meaning. It will change the TEX ID. This is called third-party malleability. BIP 62, dealing with malleability, attempted to address these issues in a piecemeal manner, but was too complicated to implement as consensus checks had been withdrawn. For example, you could submit a transaction with TEX ID EFSF or .C309 to the network, but instead find that a third party, such as a node on the network, relaying transaction, or the miner includes their transaction in a block, modifies the transaction slightly, resulting in your transaction still spitting the same coins and paying the same address, but being confirmed under a completely different TEX ID, 6834 .8 BFA instead. More generally, if one or more of the signers of the transaction revise their signatures, then the transaction remains valid and pays the same amount to the same addresses, but the TEX ID changes completely because it incorporates the signatures. The general case of the changes to signature data, but not the outputs or choice of inputs, modify the transaction is called a script seg malleability. Segwit prevents third-party and script seg malleability by allowing Bitcoin users to move the malleability parts of the transaction into a transaction witness and segregating that witness so the changes to the witness does not affect calculation of the TEX ID. So who benefits? Wallet authors tracking spent Bitcoins. It's easy. The easiest to monitor the status of your ongoing transaction by simply looking them up by the TEX ID. But in a system with third-party malleability, wallets must implement extra code to be able to deal with change TEX IDs. 2. Anyone spending an unconfirmed transaction. If Alice pays Bob in transaction 1, and Bob uses the payment to pay Charlie in transaction 2, and then Alice's payment gets malleated and confirmed with a different TEX ID, then transaction 2 is now invalid and Charlie has not been paid. If Bob is trustworthy, he will reissue the payment to Charlie, but if he isn't, he can simply keep those Bitcoins for himself. 3. The Lightning Network. With a third-party and script sig malleability fix, the Lightning Network is less complicated to implement and significantly more efficient in use of space on the blockchain. With script sig malleability removed, it also becomes possible to run lightweight Lightning clients that outsource monitoring the blockchain, instead of each Lightning client needing to also be a full Bitcoin node. Anyone using the blockchain smart contracts today, such as micropayment channels and anticipating new smart contracts, become less complicated to design and understand and monitor. Note: Segwit transactions only avoid malleability if all their inputs are Segwit spins, either directly or via backward compatible Segwit P2SH address. Some further information, which we will talk about next episode when we talk about Bitcoin malleability. Linear scale of Zcash operation. A major problem with simple approaches to increasing the Bitcoin block size is that for certain transactions, signature hash scales quadratically rather than linearly. In essence, doubling the size of the transaction increases, you can double both the number of signature operations and the amount of data that has to be hashed for each of those signatures to be verified. This has been seen in the wild, where individual blocks require 25 seconds to validate, and maliciously designed transactions can take over 3 minutes. Segwit resolves this by changing the calculation of transaction hash for signatures so that each byte of transaction only needs to be hashed at most twice. This proves the same functionality more efficiently, so the large transactions can still be generated without running into problems due to signature hashing, even if they're generated maliciously or much larger blocks, and therefore large transactions are supported. Who benefits? Removing the quadratic scaling of hash data from verifying signatures makes increasing the block size safer. Doing that without limiting transaction size allows Bitcoin to continue to support payments that go to or come from large groups, such as payments and mining rewards or crowdfunding services. The modified hash only applies to signature operations initiated from witness data, so signature operations from these base blocks will continue to require lower limits. Signing of input values. When a hardware wallet signs a transaction, it can easily verify the total amount being spent, but can only safely determine the fee by having a full copy of all the input transactions being spent. It must hash each of those to ensure it's not being fed false data. Since individual transactions can be up to 1 megabyte in size, it's not necessarily a cheap operation, even if the transactions being signed itself is quite small. Segwit resolves this by explicitly hashing the input value. That means that the hardware wallet can simply be given a transaction hash, index, and value, and told what public keys were used, and can safely sign the spending transaction no matter how large or complicated the transaction being spent was. Who benefits? Manufacturers and users of hardware wallets are obvious beneficiaries. However, this likely only makes it much easier to safely use Bitcoin in small embedded devices for Internet of Things applications. The benefit only is available when spending transactions sent to Segwit-enabled addresses or Segwit VPTSH addresses. Further information. Increased security for multi-sig via pay to hash to script hash. So, multi-sig payments currently use PTC P2SH, which is secured by the 160-bit hash 160 algorithm, or RIP-MD of SHA-256. However, if one of the signers wishes to steal all the funds, they can find a conclusion between a valid address as part of their multi-sig script and a script that simply pays them all the funds with only 8 bits worth of work, which is already within the realm of possibility for an extremely well-resourced attacker. For comparison, as a sustained 1 extra hash second, the Bitcoin mining network does 80 bits worth of work every 2 weeks. Segwit resolves this by using hash 160 only for payments directed to a single public key, where this sort of attack is useless, while using 256-bit SHA-256 hash for payments to script hash. So who benefits? Everyone's paying to a multi-sig or smart contract via Segwit benefits from the extra security provided for the scripts. Scripting version. Changes to the Bitcoin script allows for both improved security and improved functionality. However, the design of the script only allows backwards compatible software changes to be implemented by replacing one of the 10 extra opcodes with a new opcode that can initially fail the script, but which otherwise does nothing. This is sufficient for many changes, such as introducing a new signature method or a feature like CLTV, but is both slightly hacky, for example. OpCLT usually has to be accompanied by an op drop that cannot be used to enable even features as simple as joining 2 strings. Segwit resolves this by including a version number of scripts, so the additional opcodes that would have required a hard fork to be used in a non-segregated transaction can instead be supported by simply increasing the script version. Who benefits? Easier changes to script opcodes will make advanced scripting in Bitcoin easier. This includes changes such as introducing Sonor signatures, using key recovery to shrink signature size, supporting sidechains, or creating even smarter contracts by using the Merkleized abstract syntax trees, or MOASP, and other research-level ideas. Reducing UTX growth. So the unspent transaction output database is maintained by each validating Bitcoin node in order to determine whether new transactions are valid or fraudulent. For efficient operation of the network, this database needs to be very quick to curate and modify, and should be ideally able to fit in the main memory RAM, so keeping the database size and bytes as small as possible is valuable. This becomes more difficult as Bitcoin grows, as each new user must have at least one UTX entry of their own and will prefer having multiple entries to help improve their privacy and flexibility, or to provide as backing for payment channels on other smart contracts. Segwit improves the situation there by making signature data, which does not impact the UTX set size, cost 75% less than the data that does impact the UTX set size. It is expected to encourage users to favor the use of transactions that minimize impact on the UTX set in order to minimize fees, and encourage developers to design smart contracts and new features in a way that also minimize the impact on the UTXO set.
Because Segwit is a soft forking change, it does not increase the base block size. The worst case growth of the UTX set stays the same. Who benefits? Reducing UTX growth will benefit miners, businesses, and users who run full nodes, which in turn helps maintain the current security of the Bitcoin network as more users enter the system. Users and developers who help minimize the growth of the UTX set will benefit from lower fees compared to those who ignore the impact of their transaction on the UTX growth. Efficiency gains were not verifying signatures. Signatures for historical transactions may be less interesting than signatures for future transactions. For example, Bitcoin does not check signatures for transactions prior to the most recent checkpoint by default, and some SPV clients simply don't check signatures themselves at all, trusting that it's already been done by miners or other nodes. At present, however, signature data is an integral part of the transaction and must be present in order to calculate the transaction hash. Segregating the signature data allows nodes that are interested in signature data to prune it from the disk or to avoid downloading in the first place and saving resources. So you can have a smaller Bitcoin node, if you will. Who benefits? As most transactions use segregated addresses, people running pruned or SVB nodes will be able to cooperate with less bandwidth and disk space. Block capacity/size. Since old nodes will only download the witness strip block, they only enforce the 1 megabyte block size limit rule on the data. New nodes which understand the full block with witness data are therefore free to replace the limit with a new one, allowing for larger block size. Segregated witness therefore takes advantage of this opportunity to raise the block size limit to nearly 4 megabytes and adds a new cost limit to ensure blocks remain balanced in the resource use. This efficiently results in an effective limit close to 1.6 to 2 megabytes. Who benefits? People who run upgraded wallets will be able to take advantage of the increased block size by moving signatures to the witness section of the transaction. Moving towards a single combined block limit. Currently, there are two consensus enforced limits on block size. The block can no larger than 1 megabyte, and independently there can be no more than 20,000 signature checks performed across the transaction in the block. Finding the most profitable set of transactions to include in the block, given a single limit, is the instance of the knapsack problem, which can be easily solved almost perfectly with a simple greedy algorithm. However, adding the second constraint makes finding a good solution very hard in some cases, and this theoretical problem has been exploited in practice to force blocks to be mined at a size well below capacity. It is not possible to solve this problem without either a hard fork or substantially decreasing the block size. Since segregated witness can't fix the problem, it settles on to making it worse. In particular, rather than introducing an independent limit for segregated witness data, instead a single limit is applied to the weight sum of the UTX data and the witness data, allowing both to be limited simultaneously as a combined entity. Who benefits? Ultimately, miners will benefit if the future hard fork that changes the block capacity limit to be a single weighted sum of parameters, for example, 10 megabytes. This lets miners easily accurately fill blocks while maximizing fee income, and that will benefit users by allowing them to more reliably calculate the appropriate fee needed for the transactions to be mined. And there was an update as of October 19th, 2016. Earlier versions of the page listed compact fraud proofs as a benefit of Segwit. However, as implemented, Segwit does not make this any easier. With or without Segwit, a future soft fork enable compact fraud proofs, and the benefits they bring will need to include its own commitment, or IG, in the Coinbase transaction, rather than being able to extend the committed data used by Segwit. So, kind of breaking this down, going by section here. So, malleability, we're going to talk about that the next episode. All the players that are kind of benefiting here. Wallets. Wallet people are going to benefit both the SPVs, businesses. Those who have created and designed wallets are going to be able to benefit. People spending transactions by using segregated witness, they're not paying as much high fees, if you will. Lightning Network is an add-on that we'll eventually talk about. We'll be able to have it. Smart contracts, the thing that we're seeing on Ethereum, can now be done on Bitcoin. So the next section, when it talks about linear scaling of Zcash operations, basically what it is again, is talked about in the previous definitions, is by reorientating everything, making things more efficient and effective so that all people can participate. Primarily the node operators, you're going to allow them to be maybe come back on and decentralize. They're not going to drop off. Their memory and RAM is not going to be eaten up by the current blockchain, because everything is going to be smaller. So instead of, as the growth is going, maybe what once took 2 blocks of transactions to occur, maybe everything's now going to be just 1 block. And so there's going to be, eventually all that's going to add up, there's going to be less gigs added to the overall blockchain, if you will. And so it's going to be much easier for people to download and be able to participate, whether they do so as a full node operator where they have the entire blockchain, but if there are the lightweight or the SPVs or the pruned nodes where they only have what is necessary to verify transactions, they can do so with a greater sense of security. And another thing is these localized abstract syntax trees is, I guess, a different method of making smart contracts and being able to do it on top of the Bitcoin block space. The other thing is that with segregated witness, then you can do, which is part of the Segwit 2x, you can do a block size increase, and you're not going to have the same issues with malleability, the hard wallet issues, the node issues, the miner issues. You're able to increase the block size without having all this expenditure of CPU power and mining power and nodes and all that stuff, and the extra cost is not going to occur when you increase the block size, if you will. And then here's an article by ach101.com, Segwit FUD Clear Up. So, clearing the FUD around segregated witness. Lately, I've been noticing a variety of online communities such as bitcoin.org, r/Bitcoin, RPTC, bitco.in, and bitcoin.com that many users do not understand what segregated witness, commonly known as Segwit, is and what it does. I've seen that there are plenty of other uninformed and misinformed users spreading FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt about Segwit, and I'm here to clear this up. What is Segwit? Segregated Witness is a solution created by the Bitcoin developers. It's spearheaded by Peter Will, Justin Liu, and Eric Lambrauzo. The general high-level idea of Segwit is that signatures and transactions, also called witness data, are skipped when calculating the transaction ID. By doing so, it solves many issues that Bitcoin has, and these benefits are laid out here. Clearing up the myths. It has a linkage here under here. In this section, I will clear up many of the myths and misinformation around Segwit. This will grow and change as people respond to me. Myth. Segwit is primary for Lightning Network. That's simply not true. The true original purpose of Segwit was to prevent transaction malleability. Since it removes the signature from the data that is hashed into becoming the transaction ID, there is then simply no way for a third party to change the signature data so that it will still valid but produce a different transaction ID from the original. This attack is a high S, low S attack, which works because the signatures were to protect the rest of the transaction ID from being modified to protect itself. With this separation, Segwit is no longer vulnerable to these transaction malleability attacks, as the text ID is calculated from the data that cannot be changed at all by third party. Although it began as a transaction malleability fix, it has evolved to something a little bit more complex. Segwit introduced a new hash pre-image generation algorithm, which will make signature hashing operation scale linearly. The hash pre-image of the data that is being to be hashed, this hash will be signed and that signature for transaction. The change enables the use of hash mid-states, which allow for faster and more efficient hashing. This makes the relationship between the number of signature hashes and the time to generate them linear instead of the former quadratic relationship. Additionally, to maintain backwards compatibility, the size of the transaction accounts for the part of the block size is the size of the data with the old transaction serialization. This means the witness data is not included in this calculation. That means that a significant portion of the data in the transaction is not counted in the block size. More transactions can then fit in the block. This is effectively a capacity increase. However, full nodes will still be able to download all the witness data to verify blocks and transactions, and they will still have the same network bandwidth cost as increased block size to support a similar capacity would have. Myth. Segwit as a soft fork is more dangerous than a hard fork. Segwit deployed as a soft fork is actually safer than a hard fork. A soft fork means that the backwards and forward compatibility is maintained. Old versions of Bitcoin software will be able to function with no ill effect when a soft fork is deployed. In contrast, a hard fork requires that every single Bitcoin user upgrade their software to support the new consensus rule. This has the effect of being not backwards compatible and thus forcing users to upgrade to the latest version and risk of being kicked off the Bitcoin network. Segwit is in fact originally planned as a hard fork, but the developers realized it could be done as a soft fork, and doing so would be safer than a hard fork. The only difference between Segwit as a soft fork and as a hard fork is where the witness root hash goes, and whether the witness data is counted in the block size or not. With the witness root hash, it would have either been in the block header or in the Coinbase transaction. Segwit chose to put it in the Coinbase transaction as an op return output. This is safer because this allows for Segwit to be done as a soft fork, even though the data is still the same size as it would have been if it were in the header. The other difference is whether to include the witness data in the block size count and to maintain backwards compatibility while also having the capacity increase, and decided not to do so. Myth. Segwit is a cudgel hacked together software that's not ready. No, this is very far from the truth. The Bitcoin core developers have very strict testing required that tests exist to test every single scenario. When new functionality is introduced, an automated test must also exist. The developers will also review the code and test it themselves to guarantee that it works as intended. Segwit is also written by some very good developers who both came up with the concept and then implemented it. Before being added to Bitcoin Core, it will be tested very thoroughly over several days or even weeks to make sure that it was all ready. The implementation has now already been tested, with it being run by several people, and it's on the 4th iteration of the Segregated Witness testnet. There are, however, a few hacks which are designed to allow Segwit nodes to maintain compatibility with older software. The witness root hash being placed in the Coinbase transaction and the witness data not being counted towards the block size are two most important hacks that Segwit employs. They are necessary to maintain compatibility with non-upgraded nodes. While Segwit is indeed more complex and introduces many changes, but is a relatively simple conceptual change, similar to a hard fork to increase the block size limit. So Segwit is more complex than a super simple hard fork. On the surface, they appear simple. Segwit ignores the signatures when calculating a transaction. But as a soft fork, some additional changes may be made to make Segwit transactions compatible with non-Segwit nodes. These changes then have a side effects which can be beneficial to Bitcoin. It also contains more functionality than a hard fork, increasing the block size limit. The hard fork to increase the block size limit also appears simple, but additional changes need to be made to support the deployment and to solve the quadratic hashing issue with transactions. Additionally, the BIPs and the Segwit wallet dev guide are detailed and can help developers implement Segwit properly. When Segwit activates, I won't be able to send and receive my Bitcoin anymore if I don't upgrade. With the way the Segwit is designed, people can still send a transaction using pay to public key hash and pay to script hash and pay to pub key outputs as current software do. These outputs and the way they spend from these outputs will not change. The signature for verifying these transactions will not be moved and will remain the same script. What Segwit does change is it adds two new output types, pay to witness public key hash and pay to witness script hash. These two new output types require that the signature to spend for these outputs are in a new segregated witness array, which is not included in the hash of the transaction. The script seg of the inputs that spend those output types are empty. The output types are still compatible with non-upgraded nodes because they will always validate as true in these non-upgraded nodes, because when they validate these transactions, the stack is not empty and not zero. Upgraded nodes will validate them fully because the nodes have access to signatures and recognize them as output and format. Segregated witness also creates a new type of pay to script hash address. The redeem script of the PTSH address is one of two new witness output types. The redeem script is hash and that becomes a P2SH address. This allows for senders who have not yet upgraded to send to a person who has upgraded the recipient when he sends them from his P2SH output and can take advantage of Segwit benefits. Overall, the Segwit do maintain compatibility with non-upgraded nodes. With these changes, a non-upgraded user can send Bitcoin using the current output types, thus be able to spend to both upgraded and non-upgraded users. Because the transactions use the current output types, the following transactions cannot take advantage of the Segwit. However, a non-upgraded user can send to the Segwit output nested in a P2S output, which allows them to send to upgraded users who can then take advantage of the Segwit for the following transaction. Upgraded users can also spend from any output types that are still created the current output types, so they can send to non-upgraded users as well. So if you don't have to upgrade if you don't want to, and you can send to upgraded nodes, and upgraded ones can send you your Bitcoin. Bitcoin is still fungible. You can spend away if you will. There's nothing blocking that, and that's important if you will. If I don't upgrade, I can be attacked by people sending me transactions with Segwit outputs. If you don't upgrade, your wallet will not know of Segwit outputs. It will not know that the outputs are meant for you. This can, of course, create problems if an upgraded user decides to create a Segwited output when sending to a non-upgraded user. The non-upgraded user will not recognize the transaction is for him, and this can create disputes. Unfortunately, this flaw cannot be fixed through the consensus rules, but rather through software implementation. For this, the best thing to do is for software to not use the Segwit output types at all, but rather continue to use the currently used PTPK, PTSH, and PTA outputs. This can still take advantage of Segwit because the new Segwit output types can be nested inside of the P2SH addresses. New wallet addresses should have this type. The PTWPTA or PTWSH output is placed as a redeem script of the PTSH address. The users can still send together without issue, and the upgraded users can still take advantage of Segwit. So it's just basically saying, yeah, you can still send your Bitcoin or segregated Bitcoin back and forth if you will. With the way the wallets are, there's two forms. You can have a wallet recognizes Segwit, or you can have a wallet that doesn't. It's not going to prevent you from receiving your Bitcoin. Miners who don't upgrade to Segwit will be forced off the network. This is not true. Miners will not be forked off the network. Segwit will be deployed using the BIP9 version bit, which uses a 95% threshold. If a miner has less than 5% of the hashing power and did not upgrade, he will not run into significant trouble so long as he follows certain rules, the standardness rules, which most miners do actually follow today. If a miner follows the standardness rules today, which are widely accepted by everyone, then he does not risk being forked. His blocks will simply not contain the transactions that have been from the output types, nor have transactions to create new output types. His blocks do not need to have the witness root hash in the Coinbase, so as long as the block does not contain any transactions, they have witness. However, if a miner did not follow the standardness rule, then he could end up including transactions with witnesses that he wouldn't have the witness, nor would he have the witness root hash in the Coinbase. This would be an invalid block, and it would be orphaned. Because the vast majority of the hashing power supports Segwit, this miner's small fork would end up orphaned, and he would switch back to the longest blockchain, which was extended only by segregated miners. Additionally, the miner has an incentive to upgrade as less and less transactions will continue to be the current normal transactions. More and more will have Segwit outputs which and spend from them, which reduces the fees that this miner could get. Eventually, there will be some point where there are no transactions this miner can include in a block, and thus he has an incentive to upgrade in order to get the transaction fee. If he did not, he would only earn from the block subsidy. Myth. The witness discounts are to incentivize people to use Segwit. The primary idea behind the discounts are to incentivize wallets to manage change differently and clean up the UTX set. This is best explained by Adam back here. So with the miners, you don't have to, just like the node operators and the wallet operators or user operators, you don't have to upgrade to Segwit. But eventually you're going to have less and less people that are to use the old method of sending transactions. They're going to eventually switch to Segwit because it's lower fees, if you will. So that's the episode. That's what segregated witness is. I hope it was clear as possible about what it is. This is an extremely technical upgrade. It's very different from the other proposals of just hard forking and raising the block size, if you will. So our next episode will be defining malleability, and then we will get into the New York agreement Segwit and the user-activated Segwit, and that pretty much will wrap up our week on discussing segregated witness as regards to the Bitcoin block size debate. So thank you very much for listening, and to the moon.
Thank you for listening. Please rate and review either through iTunes or Stitchers or any of the podcasting apps that you're currently using to listen to this show. Thank you, and until next time. This has been a Hiroshima Space Odyssey Network production.